Welcome to our presentation, How News and AI Help Manage Credit Risk Workflows. Let me start by saying a few words about my own background. I'm a Director of Business and Commercial Strategy at Dow Jones. My focus is on Dow Jones product and market strategies. I'm passionate about how AI, NLP, and generative technologies can transform B2B customers' capability to generate valuable intelligence from premium content and data sets. I'm here with Ian Shipley. Ian is the Global Head of Data and Analytics for Oliver Wyman. He has led some of the largest engagements at Oliver Wyman, including leading the support for the ECB and European governments during the financial crisis. Ian is the senior sponsor for Factiva Sentiment Signals, alongside a number of other AI products for Oliver Wyman. Today's session is particularly relevant to those of you who are thinking about introducing a more qualitative approach to managing the credit risk workflows, or are interested in news risk monitoring. We will go on a journey on how news can inform customers on credit risk events. Here's today's agenda. We are going to talk about the current situation in the market. What are the challenges in credit risk assessment? The power of premium news, the value of trusted global licensed content in risk management. Then Ian is going to talk about enhancing credit risk workflows and the model. And he's going to talk about success stories and common use cases. So what is the current situation in the market? What are companies wrestling with? We are constantly bombarded by information. In this information world, we see 5 billion messages passing through Facebook every day, 300 billion emails sent a day, 30 billion messages are sent daily, and more than 2 million articles are published every day in the media. Existing processes are not enough. There is no capacity to keep processing all of this information using traditional methods. If you go for an example, taking the S&P 500 companies, there are around 6,000 articles per company. That means 300 hours a year or 30 to 40 working days for a credit risk officer or analyst to read the actual information. If we go to the next slide. So what are the credit risk professionals' news pain points? There are too many different sources of information. It is a lot of manual effort and time required. It's hard to filter and find actionable information. There is a lack of granularity, no clear links to outcomes or portfolio, and extra work to contextualize analyst calculations. There is also a lack of effective news solutions. The current systems and news analysis processes are relatively very old school and unsophisticated. There is very little integration of news, and we heard that they need a more streamlined way of deriving insights from the news. So if you go to the next slide, we are going to talk about the power of premium news. Some examples on the importance of monitoring the news. Let's see Wirecard. Wirecard was a German payments firm that went bankrupt in 2020 after a massive accounting scandal was revealed. The scandal, in case you didn't know, involved a 1.9 billion euro discrepancy in the company's accounts. The ESMA identified a number of shortcomings when assessing Wirecard and recommends that financial institutions review articles in international newspapers in order to add these elements when selecting issuers for examination. Another example is Greensill Capital. Greensill was a supply chain finance company that collapsed in March 2021. The House of Commons Treasury Committee lessons from Greensill report highlights the importance of monitoring the news. There were reputational issues around Greensill. You could read the newspapers at the time. But there are not only these examples, there are other examples. There's Anglo-American, Beston, Tupperware, Booktopia, etc., etc. So Not sure if you heard about Dow Jones Factiva, but I wanted to highlight the power of premium news with our Factiva service, which is a preeminent news aggregator. More than 2 billion news stories are in its archive, and some more than 40 years old. There are in-depth snapshots of over 35 million public and private companies, 90 million executive profiles, including corporate connections and key executives. The news content is not always freely available on the web, as you might know. We are talking here about premium licensed content. If you want to avoid fake news, broken links, removed articles, and paywalls, Factiva allows our users to focus on credible and reliable sources. And it allows to search faster. So negative news searches and metadata and taxonomy are applied to all articles. So if we go to the next slide, a quick reminder how Factiva is actually used. Our clients use Factiva news and data content to perform credit risk assessment, build their own risk management solutions, and strengthen risk assessment protocols. And just a reminder, Dow Jones Factiva is copyright compliant, a trusted partner. We have trusted news and data sources, and we are talking about a global coverage. I'm passing it now to Ian Shipley, who's going to talk about the credit risk workflows.
Thanks, Monica. Before we dive into the workflow that's used within Factiva Sentiment Signals, I just want to spend a moment on how clients are using it. One of the things Oliver Wyman does a huge amount of is working with banking clients around their credit processes, particularly corporate credit process. And one of the things we were noticing was that banks were spending a lot of time creating very objective quantitative ratings, but that they didn't have a good way to flow into those ratings subjective information or fast-moving information, other than for a credit officer to take a view and perhaps make an early warning signal adjustment to ratings. And some of our clients were asking us to help them introduce more objectivity in this process. And so we created a workflow that allowed clients to feed in news information, translate it into an objective score, and then use it directly to adjust their internal ratings in their corporate credit processes and take appropriate action around limit levels or restructuring or whatever it happened to be. So the core use case that was envisioned for Factiva Sentiment Signals was around credit risk management, credit officers or portfolio managers managing credit risk using the quantitative signal as a means of deciding how to take action in relation to the credits that they oversee. But we found, as we've talked about the solution with clients and people have started to use it, that there are broader uses for the tool. So, the most immediately adjacent usage we're seeing is around investment management. Obviously, if you're managing a portfolio of equity positions or debt positions in a fund, then it's a very good way of keeping track of how news information and news sentiment is changing and what that might mean for a particular position. And interestingly, we found even more broadly that just helping individuals prepare for interactions with counterparties in a broader sense, it's really quite useful as an intelligence tool. So that might be you're preparing to go and talk to a potential client in a marketing situation. It's a really good way of tracking what are the key issues, or for managing supplier risk if I'm a corporate and I want to manage my supply chain, etc. So the way that FSS works is really underpinned by the fantastic Factiva news asset. We take information or take news from 10,000 news outlets, tens of millions of articles on 450,000 companies in many languages. And we effectively ingest all of that unstructured news data into the system. And we then translate that news, that unstructured text information into a structured quantitative representation by creating embeddings using large language models. And we then train a model based on those embeddings to translate what is sort of a vector of very many different numerical representations of the news and turn it into a single prediction or a single score in relation to each company that represents the sentiment in the news from the perspective of credit risk. And one of the things that's particularly different around our solution versus some of the other sentiment solutions you've seen in the market is that we train it on the objective outcome variable that is credit rating migrations. It's not a question of having somebody read through thousands and thousands of articles and score them from a sentiment perspective. We're effectively training the model directly on something objective, which gives us advantaged performance at the end. So effectively across all of the companies in the Factiva database, we're able to produce a score through time, and we can then provide all of the analytics to the customers of FSS either through the web app and UI or via an API, so that if I'm managing a large portfolio, I can effectively ingest all of the information and track all of the names automatically. The key elements of the FSS service are that you can effectively select whatever portfolio you choose. So if I'm tracking a set of individual companies, I'm a credit officer with responsibility for covering 30 names. I can put all of those 30 names into my portfolio, and I can also include in my portfolio comparable names that I want to track, perhaps relative to the name that I'm looking at. The UI then allows me to visualize that portfolio and spot outliers by plotting the score and the change in the score. But I can also stay up to date because FSS will send me either daily or weekly emails with the list of companies in my portfolio, and it alerts me what's happening to the score on each of those names and flags who are the big negative movers. And to one of Monica's points earlier on, it allows me to look through to all of the news that's in Factiva in one place and click straight through to the articles that are most important, as well as tracking my names through time relative to each other, so that I can spot relative movements and trends. One of the things Oliver Wyman advises banks on a lot is model risk and ensuring that models are really well validated and tested. And with FSS, we've taken our own medicine fully. We worked with a partner firm in order to have that independence in valid mind. And we've got an in-depth validation report on the tool. And the predictive power of the performance is really good, really strong. We bucket companies into different risk categories from very low to very high. And in the training data sets, we see very large differences in the probability of a downgrade depending on which score bucket that the companies are in. So just to take a specific example that has ultimately ended up in Chapter 11. This is an example of Tupperware. So we can go all the way back to 2020 with Tupperware, and we saw a very elevated score, FSS score. So well into our high category, our very high category. And what we saw in 2020 was issues in the financial performance of Tupperware and its share price performance. We saw investigations into its accounting, class action lawsuits being launched, and a change in senior management. And that altogether led to a very negative FSS score and a warning about issues within Tupperware. But it seems like things stabilized, and certainly the credit sentiment in the news improved a lot, but then started to deteriorate again at the end of 2021 with, again, poor equity price performance, issues with changes in senior management, lawsuits, and some corporate events that were viewed negatively. At that point, ratings were withdrawn at Tupperware, and then in 2023, there was a real further deterioration with a set of investigations and a failed restructuring, and ultimately there was a change in management and eventually a Chapter 11 filing. So we can see that from the FSS score, there was warnings in the news well in advance of the bankruptcy, and indeed also the restructuring. So I'll stop sharing briefly at this point, and I will flip to the tool itself, and give you a bit of a walkthrough of the tool itself in action. So this is the portfolio page that I mentioned earlier. I've just selected an example portfolio of a few automotive companies with a number of pretty strong companies and one that's recently defaulted. But you can effectively choose whichever company that you want to add, and it's relatively easy to remove or add companies to the list. And then I can drill down into specific companies, and this is the sort of key UI at a company level that allows me to see what's going on in the news. So this car company is Fisker, who were a small specialist car manufacturer based in Sweden. What we saw there was a relatively volatile score, but certainly very much in the higher risk bracket in 2022, and then ultimately a large deterioration at the end of 2023 and a default and restructuring in 2024. So what we can visualize here is what's happening in the news. So red represents more negative news articles, green represents more positive news articles, and the blue line is the score with the different risk categories shown as very low, low, moderate, high, very high. And so you can see as things have deteriorated, the score has increased over time. But I can then drill down into the information there. So I can pick a particular date, and I can look at what are the relevant news articles at that particular time. I can look at what are the more negative news articles that are going on in that time. So, changes in management, issues around new products, issues around production. And I can also look at what are the themes. So what are the themes that are driving the score, issues around corporate announcements, finance and regulatory reports, how they're performing, and some corporate news around issues around products and customer demand. And if I choose to, I can drill all the way down into this and look at individual articles and see what is the underlying article that relates to. But then I can also look at things on a portfolio basis. So I can look at the snapshot of all of the companies that are in my portfolio, and I can see, where do people sit in terms of the risk categories, and how is the score moving, and I can look at that through time. So I can see here are all the companies in my portfolio. You can look at the ones that are the more significant mover, and then I can choose to filter this if I want, so that I only look at particular categories. So normal passenger cars, I exclude Fisker, and more hovering around the lower risk area. So I will just briefly now revert back to the presentation. And we have some time to open it up for questions if there are any at this point.
It doesn't look like there are any questions, but please feel free to email us if you have any questions or you would like to have a free trial.